Welcome to the show. Very, very excited to have a fellow podcaster, content creator who's killing it on the show today.
Thank you. I love your show. I love your content. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Let's start off with you giving us a brief intro, and then we're going to dive into your origin story and talk about all the amazing things that you're doing.
Yes. So my name is Les. I host a podcast called Balanced Black Girl that I started back in 2018. And I started it off to have conversations centered around women of color in wellness because I have loved wellness for a long time. I used to spend so much time listening to wellness podcasts and conversations. A lot of them were hosted by older white men. And I found myself doing a lot of mental gymnastics to try to make what they were talking about applicable to my life. And eventually I thought, okay, why don't I learn from people who have had similar lived experiences so that I can actually apply their teachings to my life? So I started that almost 6 years ago. And at the beginning of this year, took it full time.
Wow.
And
congrats.
I'm just plugging along. Thank you.
That's amazing. I think that's the dream for most of us when we start we don't even know our businesses usually. We're just kind of like, we see the void, we see the need, we see, I need this content. So maybe other people need this content. And then all of a sudden you've got this bustling brand that now allows you to like live the dream, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So let's go back in time. Was this always your passion? Like, when did you decide that you wanted to show up in the wellness space? Like, did you go to school for this or what's the connection?
I didn't. So I actually always wanted to be a journalist when I was younger. And I got to college and I realized that journalists don't make any money. And I had just taken out all these loans to be in school. And I was like, yeah, I can't afford this. That's my dream job. And I can't afford to get paid no dollars per year. I got to pay these loans back. I was a first gen college student. Like I had financial responsibilities already. I was like, all right, we're going to go into something that can make some money. So I actually studied business and finance in school because I just thought that that would lead to better job opportunities. Started working in corporate finance when I was in college. And that's what led me to wellness because I was so painfully bored sitting at my desk every day, falling asleep literally at work that I thought, okay, maybe if I exercise and maybe eat a vegetable or drink some water, maybe I will just be able to stay awake through the workday. That was truly my only aspiration when I first got into wellness was to like stay awake during my painful work days.
Be functional.
Be functional, literally. At that time, I thought, okay, this is going to be my career. I'm going to be doing this for the next 40 years. So I got to figure out some coping mechanisms, and wellness was my coping mechanism.
I think a lot of people that listen to the show can absolutely relate to the fact that like we all maybe get this like wake up call where there was this dream career and then maybe it's not so much of a dream. And I think unfortunately for a lot of people, the coping mechanism ends up becoming spending a lot of money, drinking, other recreational activities that don't necessarily involve like taking better care of yourself. So what do you think it was about you that made you like not go down that rabbit hole? Because I think a lot of people will be like, well, I'm just going to splurge on vacations. I'm going to do brunch every Sunday. Like that's how I'm going to cope with quote unquote making it.
Yeah, I do think that me gravitating towards wellness, I was very lucky that that was my coping mechanism of choice. But I do think from a very young age, I was always focused on self-improvement in some way. I mean, I know primarily you're a finance creator. And while I had really loving adults in my life, I did not have good models of how to manage money. And so from a very young age, I thought, okay, if I see money being handled this way by the adults in my life, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to seek out knowledge. I'm going to try to learn from another source if I don't see that directly in front of me. So I do think I've always kind of naturally had an inclination towards self-improvement, even from a young age, that was just natural for me to fall into wellness.
Yeah, I think that mindset is really powerful because it allows you to not kind of just perpetuate maybe the not so great things you've seen from caretakers or just your environment. It gives you kind of this perspective of just because this is where I'm from doesn't mean this is where I need to end up. And I think that's a really great mindset to have. Walk us through kind of what that wellness journey started with and how did it evolve?
Yeah. So at first it was truly just like trying to do some basic exercise to try to have enough energy to get through the day. And very quickly, I realized that my time that I spent at the gym each day was becoming my favorite part of the day. So it was like I hated my job. I was working in corporate finance. It was so boring. I had like not the best roommate situation. When you're in your early 20s, that's often what your living situation is. That wasn't great. So I didn't like being at work. I didn't like being at home, but I really enjoyed being at the gym. But I also like didn't really know what I was doing. And so I started kind of to what we were just talking about, dove headfirst into wellness education and thought, okay, well, if I'm going to work out or if I'm going to be at the gym, let me figure out what I'm doing. And so I started diving more into nutrition education, into fitness education, started learning how to lift weights, and found that it really helped me increase my confidence in a lot of ways, where I started coming out of my shell a little bit more and believing that more things were possible for me. And that led me to getting certified as a personal trainer,
Mm,
which kind of introduced my first side hustle, which was teaching fitness while I was still in corporate.
wow. So where did you work? Did you like join a gym and become a trainer there, or were you doing your own like independent clients?
I was working at gyms. Yeah. My mom is truly one of my favorite people, and she's always been like my biggest fan and supporter. And so she was taking classes at this gym that she loved at the time, around the time that I got certified as a personal trainer. And she was talking me up so much to the owner of that gym that finally he was like, okay, can I hire her? Can we bring her in? Like, you're talking about her so much. What can we do? So that ended up being my first training job.
I love that. We love a supportive mom.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
awesome. Okay, so you're doing the personal training. At what point do you make this shift that maybe it's not enough to just work with the clients that you're working with at the gym, but that you want to like spread the message?
Yeah, I started getting really, really burnt out, which I think anybody who has worked in fitness, if you've ever like taught fitness classes, you know that that is purely a passion thing. It is not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a lucrative thing. It is very
Facts.
taxing. You get paid not a lot of money. I got really burnt out. And I also felt like my relationship to wellness was shifting. I was becoming a little obsessed with it. I was becoming a little too obsessed with how I looked and what I ate. And so I wanted to take a step back and figure out how can I focus on wellness in a more balanced way. And so that was where this idea of me creating content around balance came from. And so in 2014, it's been like exactly 10 years, I started a blog. It was called The Balanced Berry, and it was all about me figuring out how I could be well in a balanced way without going overboard. And I quickly found that through the blog, I was able to reach so many more people than I was, teaching these couple classes a week or training clients one on one. And that was when I realized maybe the internet was a better route to go.
I love it. I love that your origin story is also like from the blogger perspective too. That's mine as well. And I think it's just such an underrated like way to show up as a content creator, especially nowadays where the algorithm and all these new platforms are always popping up. But I love the fact that you're still focusing in on like having this home base from a blog perspective where folks can like come and find you regardless of what's going on here in the social media world. Okay, so you start your blog. Was it ever intended to become what it's become, like a podcast, a whole brand? Or how did you go from it being like a passion project for it to now become your full time job?
I'd always hoped to do it full time. At the time, there were a bunch of other fitness and wellness bloggers who I followed, who I loved. And in the mid 2010s, that was when people were really starting to make money from content. And so I was
Hmm.
seeing some of my favorite bloggers and content creators that I followed at the time go full time. So it definitely was my aspiration. I didn't necessarily have podcasting on my radar, and Balanced Black Girl as it is now didn't exist yet. But from the day I started creating content, I definitely wanted it to be my career. It just took me a while to figure out the version of content creation that worked best for me.
Hmm. Can we dive into that more, right? Because I think a lot of folks, when they think about becoming content creators, they think they have to have it all figured out in the beginning. And then, like, if the original quote unquote vision doesn't work, a lot of the times they'll just give up instead of giving themselves permission to experiment and evolve so that you can actually figure out, like, what your thing is going to be. So, how did that go for you?
Yeah, I had taken years doing the balance berry, and I knew that it wasn't really working. I felt good about the content that I was creating, but I felt like there was just something missing, that the audience, even though I had a small committed audience, there was really something that was kind of blocking it from going to the next level. And I always thought, okay, I'm going to stop doing this when I get a better idea. And I said that to myself for about 4 years. And then by 2018, I was like, this is really not working. And I think I just need to take a break. And I wasn't entirely thinking about quitting altogether, but I was like, let me just take a break from this and come back to it with fresh eyes. And maybe I'll have a better idea after this little break. And it was during that break that I came up with the idea for Balanced Black Girl. And so I think giving myself a little bit of space to allow a new idea to come in and to have the time and energy to be able to execute it was major.
Yeah, I love that. Just kind of giving yourself permission that it is okay to take breaks. And that doesn't mean that you're quitting. It just means you're giving yourself a chance to assess what has happened up until this point. Stop throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that something sticks.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, maybe let's call it a pivot, right? So you decide to move from the Balanced Berry to now to this new brand you're creating, the Balanced Black Girl. What was the difference between the two, like scope wise, target audience wise? Like, what were you hoping to accomplish with this new iteration?
I think the biggest difference was with Balanced Black Girl, I did have a target audience versus with the Balanced Berry, I was just kind of posting stuff online and hoping that whoever saw it saw it. With Balanced Black Girl, I was very clear about who my target listener was at that time. And even though my audience has expanded and now I have plenty of listeners who don't fit that mold, because I was so clear about it from the beginning, the people who resonated with that message took to it immediately, and it grew so much faster and had such a more dedicated community to it because the content was for somebody. It wasn't just content for content's sake, which is what I was doing before.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I coach a lot of content creators who are maybe a little afraid to like show up for a specific community. Like, obviously, with your brand name, you are literally calling out, "Hi, Black women. Like, I am here to have a conversation with you," just by what's in your brand. And it's the same with me, just having a Spanish language brand, if you will. So, what do you say to creators that are like afraid to put that line in the sand, if you will? Because from what I've heard, some folks can interpret it as, well, does that mean like you're excluding other people? Are we allowed to be here? Like, well, how do you challenge that messaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the best example would be like, I've listened to you, Quiero, Dinero. I'm so sorry, I don't speak any Spanish, but I've listened to your show for years now when I was still working in corporate. And I'm not Latina. Again, I just butchered that. I can't speak any Spanish. But because the content was so good and I resonated so much with your story, when I first found out about your podcast, like I subscribed and tuned in immediately because the message is going to reach who it's going to reach. And then also for those members of your audience who do resonate specifically with that archetype that you're speaking to, they can immediately go, oh my gosh, this is directly for me. It's like she's literally in my brain talking to me exactly what I need to hear, and then shares it with her friends, and then they share it with a friend. And when you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one, and who it's meant to reach, it will reach. I even got a DM the other day from this young white woman who was like, I love your podcast so much. My aunt shared it with me. So I'm like, your aunt, who is also probably like a white woman, like a middle-aged white woman, like loves the podcast and shared it with you, because people at the end of the day care more about good content, but you have to be really clear about who you want it to reach and who you want it to touch, and it will reach more people if it's good content.
Absolutely. Love that advice. Now, for the content creators who are like, but I love all the things and I want to talk about all the things on my platform, what's your advice? And how did you decide kind of what those content pillars were going to be for you?
I do think that people can talk about all the things, but they may not be able to talk about all of the things all of the time right away. So I think when people are first getting started, it does help to have more of a clear focus so that people know what they're going to get from you. So for me with wellness, that's a pretty easy one where it's very easy for me to talk about what workouts I'm doing. It's very easy for me to talk about what recipes I'm trying. And it's very easy for me to talk about what I learned in therapy. So like those three things, physical health, mental health, nutrition, were definitely the cornerstone of my show when I first started. And as the community grew and people became more curious about me as a person, then they naturally wanted to learn more. Then they naturally wanted to be like, hey, Les, what books are you reading? Even though it's not at all related to wellness. Or, hey, Les, like, what is that product that you put in your hair? Like, as people get to know you, they're going to want to know more about you, and you can show those other sides of you more once you have a bit of a community who's already showing up for you. But at the beginning, when you're talking about everything and people don't know what to expect, it's harder for people to know what to hold on to.
Hmm. And I would also argue it's harder for brands who want to potentially work with you to know what the hell it is you're talking about. What are we paying
Yes.
you to do here?
Right.
All right, so let's talk about the monetization aspect of it, right? Because I think that is the goal for many people, is to make money doing something that they're passionate about, sharing content online. How did that journey evolve for you?
Let's see. I started creating content in 2014. I started making kind of some small amounts of money here and there, maybe like 2016. I would say I started making more consistent money that was kind of along the lines of like a part-time job between 2018 to 2021. And then 2021 onwards, it was like, okay, this is now becoming more lucrative. And I was able to replace my full-time job with it.
Mhm.
So it was a very slow and steady process for sure.
Can we talk about like how you monetize the different income streams? Because I think that's a mystery in itself, for a lot of people who don't understand the online content creation world. Like, how do we actually make money doing this?
Yeah. Most of my money comes from brand partnerships these days. I would say back when I first started and when I didn't necessarily have that savvy of working with brands and had a much smaller community, I was more so selling directly to my community. So I would create workout programs, I would create little boot camps, I would take recipes that I created from my blog and I would put them just in ebooks and meal plans for people if they didn't want to sift through my whole website. So it was like very easy to repurpose and monetize the content that I'd already created.
Mm.
And then as kind of my business acumen grew and I learned how to work with brands better and how to better leverage the community that I built, I was able to shift more of that energy into working with brands.
Amazing. So you're creating content online. Are you also using brands to monetize your podcast?
Yes, I started getting brands working on my podcast or working with me on my podcast pretty early on. I started my podcast in the fall of 2018. I want to say I got my first few sponsorships in the spring of 2019. However, I didn't consistently bring in real revenue from the podcast until about 2021. So it was still like a pretty slow climb.
Hmm. And did you use like an agency to monetize, or is this like you pitching yourself to brands that you are a fan of?
At first, it was just me pitching myself to
Hmm.
brands for the first couple of years.
Okay.
Or because I had a little bit of like an influencer following, I had been working with some brands on social media deals that I was managing those relationships myself. And then I would also negotiate like a podcast component to try to get
Mm.
more money. Like I would bundle, hey, you can sponsor this episode of the podcast and this Instagram post for
Hmm.
this X amount. And then in 2021, that was when I did start working with an agency specifically for my podcast. And that helped me monetize more just from a bandwidth perspective. When you have a team that's pitching and selling on your behalf, I was able to focus more on the content and it just made it a little more streamlined.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about wellness from the perspective of you are a creator who is building this platform while also working full time, while also trying to take care of yourself, while also not trying to have mental breakdowns. What does that look like, right? Because I think a lot of people can be overwhelmed with the idea of starting this side business and just like, where am I going to find this time?
Yeah. I mean, I will be fully transparent. I did definitely still have a few mental breakdowns over the years. So I won't lie
It's all
and say
part
that
of
I
it.
didn't. Part of the human experience. I reached a point, especially, when it was about, I would say 2020 through 2023. That was when I was really at the height of growing the podcast and I was still working full time in corporate at that time. And I had gotten really freaking good at systems. So I had
Mm.
automated every part of the process of creating my podcast that I could. I got really, really organized. I started creating templates for everything and onboarding documents for everything, just so that creating and producing the podcast became very streamlined and very, very simple to save myself time. I became very regimented with my time. So I had a super intense morning routine where I would get up very early. I would work out very early. I would spend 1 to 2 hours working on the business before I even logged on to my 9 to 5, because I knew at the end of the day I would just be too tired and it wouldn't happen. And
Yeah.
I was very routined with that schedule for a number of years.
Yeah, that discipline, it really has to be kind of the center of what you get done because your time is so limited. You mentioned you were logging in. So was remote work, would you say, a benefit in this journey for you?
It definitely was. Yeah. And there were seasons in this where I did work in offices. I mean, I worked consistently in an office from 2010 to 2019. So almost the first decade of my career, you know, I had commutes and I worked in offices and I was still podcasting and blogging and side hustling, but it was a lot harder. I was still doing a lot of the same things, but I was just a lot crankier from commuting. And then in 2019, that was when I got my first remote job, and that helped a lot. So then I would reconfigure my schedule, and the time that I would spend commuting, I would instead use that to work on my business. But I was also very intentional about making sure that I used my schedule that way, as opposed to using that time to scroll on Instagram for a couple extra hours or whatever. I started managing my time almost like how I manage my money. Like I would create a time budget the same way I would create a financial budget. And I would look at, where am I spending my time like I'm spending my money? And that helped a lot.
Yeah, I love that approach because I mean, I would argue that time is your most valuable currency. And if you don't know where the hell it's going, you don't really know what's happening.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're building this brand, and you said last year, or is it the beginning of this year, you took the leap of faith into full-time entrepreneurship?
I did. I quit my corporate job in December of
Wow.
2023. Yeah.
Amazing. First off, congratulations. That's
Thank
incredible.
you.
And secondly, what was the sign that you were ready to take that leap?
It was a couple of different things. I had been working towards it for a number of years, and there were specific things that I wanted to have in place before I took that leap. So I had had a lot of student loan debt, and I knew that I would feel more comfortable diving into full time entrepreneurship once that was paid off. So I had spent a number of years paying towards it, and it took me about 10 years total to pay it off. But I would say from 2020 to 2022, I was very, very diligent about paying it off in those last 2 years. And that was when I paid off a majority of the debt. So that was a big part of me feeling comfortable making the leap. I wanted to have a certain amount in savings as kind of emergency savings or backup fund before I took the leap. I wanted to have a certain amount invested for retirement to give myself some cushion before I took the leap. So when I hit those milestones, that's when I was thinking, okay, I can take this more seriously. I also wanted to surpass my income in revenue for a couple of years to prove to myself, okay, I can do this. And so I had about 3 years, or for the past 3 years, my revenue started surpassing my income more and more, to the point where I was like, okay, this isn't a fluke. I feel more comfortable doing this. And then I'd reached a point at the end of 2023 where I was getting some really cool opportunities, and I was just tired of asking for permission to be able to do them. And
Yeah.
I was like, I just want to be able to say yes to the things that I want to do. And I've dotted my I's and I've crossed my T's and I've put myself in a good position. And I had had a conversation with one of the leaders at work who was wanting to put kind of more work on my plate without increasing my salary. That was the kind of the final straw where I ultimately decided I actually think I would rather do my own thing full time. That this is the moment I'm realizing I'm ready, because I'm not interested in doing that.
Yeah. Who wants to work more and not get paid more? I mean, really, what a hard bargain to say no
Yeah.
to. Well, that's incredible. I love kind of your, what sounds like a methodical approach in your decision to leave, because I think there's sort of like these two schools of thought, which I do not agree with. You know, that side of the business coaching world that's just like, no, just like jump out of the plane and you'll figure it out. And that pressure is going to be what makes you successful in it, what pushes you to like achieve. And I'm like, no, that's just going to cause me to be fucking stressed. Okay. I
Exactly.
want to have a plan. I want to have some cushion. I want to make sure that I'm not making this decision to then have to move back in with my parents in 6 months because I did not think about like the full picture of this. So I really love that you took that approach, because that's the same approach that I took.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the world of wellness. The world of wellness, as I've experienced it as a Latina, is still very white. But what I think happens for creators of color who want to show up in these or a varied number of other spaces, including finance and motherhood and all the different kind of genres that there are to be a creator in, I think there's this perception that there's too many people doing this. So why am I going to get involved? What do you say, especially to like creators of color, about why maybe saturation is a myth?
I get people asking me questions all the time to explain things or post about things that I feel like I've seen 12 million times since 2014. Like, I still get some questions where people ask, what is this? What is that? How do you do this? How do you do that? Of things that I would have thought everybody knows this. Everybody's seen this a million times. Everybody is sick of this. And it's just not true. Maybe people have seen it, or maybe people have seen other creators do it, but it just doesn't resonate with them. Maybe the way that you explain it is what they need to get it, is what they need to have it resonate with them. I also just think that people are moving in and out of the creator space all the time, and there's always room for new people, because I don't think any of us are really going to be creators doing the same thing for forever. And so when you kind of move on to do something else, when you move on to create another type of content, I think that opens up room for other people to be able to create from their unique perspectives. And I also just think that when we have the desire to do something, that's an inclination that we should just give it a try. So if it's on someone's heart to try creating content, I think that the desire to do that is there for a reason, and that it's worth exploring regardless of how many other people are doing it or not.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And it's just important to remember, like, nobody can do it how you do it. So there really is no competition because you are one of one.
Exactly.
One thing that I have experienced is I'm also a fitness instructor, and it took a lot of reprogramming in my family for the women to like believe that wellness and fitness and nutrition is even something that we should have the luxury to indulge in or privilege. What's been some of those kind of narratives that maybe you've been confronted by as a woman of color in this space that honestly for a lot of people can feel like, yeah, that's great. Like you can go to the gym and work out and shit, but like I'm struggling out here. I'm just trying to feed my family. I don't have time. That's not for us.
I think a lot of conversations about self-care that center women of color center very much around aesthetics.
Oh.
So I think for women of color, when we think about self-care, we think about things like getting a facial, getting our nails done, getting our hair done. And all those things are great, and they can be great acts of self-care, but it doesn't stop there. And so I think that self-care is doable from wherever somebody is, regardless of what their budget is. But a lot of wellness information that's out there in content, and even some of mine, because we live in a capitalistic society, is very commodified. And people, shouldn't feel like they have to buy every expensive supplement or go to a fancy Pilates studio to be able to be well. And even if someone can't do those things, I really, really want us all to explore what can wellness look like for us from exactly where we are, but how can that go beyond what we just see on the outside? How can that go beyond what we look like? How do we feel? Are we focused on longevity? Are we looking at some of the negative health outcomes that plague our communities and the things that we can do to try to prevent that? And those are really the types of conversations that I really like to have.
Yeah, those are so important because you're right. I even think about, when people would even mention like dieting and fitness in my community as a Latina, like it was always you're trying to lose weight because you want to look cute for a wedding or a vacation, or you want to get a boob job or whatever. Like I'm not saying there's anything wrong with like all of these aspirations, but it's also just like what's the greater why? Because if you're just doing this for a short-term fix, like you want to look good in your wedding photos, but then it's just like you go right back to the bullshit and you're not taking care of yourself, it's like why? This needs to be more of a lifestyle versus just you do it for a short amount of time. And I think we have so many examples of what neglecting yourself over those decades looks like with our elders and all the chronic conditions that exist and all the pills that they're on. And it's like, y'all, we already know what the example is that we don't want to follow. What if we do things differently? Let's try something else.
Right. And, thinking about so many of our elders, like a lot of them didn't have access to the information that we have now.
Right.
And now, in so many ways, like we know better. We know the things that negatively impact our health. We know a lot of the things to do to improve our health. And so, kind of like that Maya Angelou quote, like when you know better, you do better, really prioritizing what it looks like to do
Yeah,
better.
I love it. Okay, let's talk about the word balance because it's a very charged term. Does it exist? And if it does, what does it actually look like, especially for women of color?
Okay, yes. This is, I know everybody hates the word balance, and I get it. But I think why people are down on the word balance is people are thinking about equilibrium. When people
Mm,
hear the word balance, they automatically assume, oh, that means I have to do 100% at work, 100% at home. I have to be a super mom, super wife, super daughter, super aunt, super this, super that, and give 1,000% in every area. And that's not what I necessarily define balance is. I think balance is more so leaning into whatever season of life that we are in. So if we're in a season of life where maybe work is a little bit more demanding and we have to give ourselves to that area more, then we do that and we get support in the other areas. Or if somebody is like a new mom and they are in it and it is all hands on deck while their kids are really young and that's what it is, then that can be where their focus is and everything else can be kind of held steady. Maybe you give 100% in that area and maybe you give like a solid 60 in the other areas to keep your sanity and let that be okay. So that's how I personally define balance and
mhm.
what kind of works for me. But I do think it's hard because there's so much pressure on women to be 100% at everything all the time. And I appreciate that we're now at a time where women are pushing back on that a little bit more and being more honest about how much we're carrying.
Yeah.
And I think that with that honesty comes a lot of power.
I love that. And I also think that if we really want to strike a balance, it's going to require access to resources. And this
It
is why
is.
I'm so passionate about talking about money in the context of like how much power it can give you, especially as a woman and a woman of color. Because when you have access to resources, you can outsource, you can ask
Yes.
for help, you can pay for help. You do not have to do all the heavy lifting yourself. And so this is a reason for you, like if you find yourself stretched thin in so many aspects of your life, it's probably because you just don't have adequate support. And if you don't have people in your circle that you can ask for that for free, then you need to start making some damn money so you can pay people to help you because you were never meant to do any of all of this stuff alone.
Oh, 100%. We all know that phrase where it's like it takes a village to raise a child. I think adults need villages too. The
Facts.
village doesn't stop when we're no longer a child.
Absolutely. I'm really curious how your own wellness journey has evolved from when you first started to now. And what do you think is next?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changed a lot. You know, I first started getting interested in wellness when I was 20, and now I'm in my mid 30s. And so life just looks very different for me right now. And I'm not really interested in spending like hours and hours doing things like I was before. So I'm much more focused on simplicity when it comes to wellness, efficiency when it comes to wellness. And I'm interested in living more. You know, I spent a lot of time focusing on working out all the time and eating clean. And I missed out on a lot of things. I missed out on a lot of living when I was
Mm,
younger. And so for me now, it looks like, okay, how can I do just enough of those things to help me live more as opposed to missing out because I'm so focused on trying to be perfect?
I think it comes back to that word of balance, right? It's just
Hmm.
knowing it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can still go and enjoy your life, but also be actively taking care of yourself. And it doesn't have to be like this regimented, rigid, disciplined, excruciating experience, which I think a lot of us can associate with fitness and wellness culture because when we think about the word dieting, it's very much like the word budgeting. It just feels like, oh shit, we got to struggle out here. I can't do nothing. I can't enjoy anything. And like, what's the point, y'all? You have to
Right.
live.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So, what's next for you, Les?
What is next for me? I mean, continuing on with Balanced Black Girl, which is really great. I am also working on a new business that I'm excited to share more details about later this year that will be launching with some of my own products for the first
Very
time.
cool.
So it's not a Balanced Black Girl products. It's going to be its own separate brand, but will be very complementary for anybody who kind of likes that type of lifestyle. So I'm working heavily on that right now. Also planning to do some live shows for my community before the end of the year. So some fun things coming.
That's exciting. I feel like at some point we're going to need some balanced Black girl retreats. So I'm just going to put that energy out there too, because I think there's so much power in finding your community in these spaces. It really allows you to even show up for yourself more and just believe that you are deserving of pouring into yourself, and, you know, you're worthy of making those types of commitments to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Where can folks find you on social, and where can we listen to the show?
Yes, so you can listen to new episodes of Balanced Black Girl every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And then I also have full video episodes on YouTube. And then you can find me on social media at Balanced Less. I'm most active on Instagram and TikTok.
Amazing. This has been such an inspirational conversation. I hope that you all are thinking about how you can insert some more wellness into your life, because when you look good, you feel good. And when you feel good, you can make more money. So it's all connected.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.